I have to say, Trump is just like those big shots from my hometown with gold chains around their necks, even though they don't have any money in their pockets. But when you're out there, it's all about two words: face. Originally, on April 8th, Trump had already made a statement, asking China to call for peace first. It's just saying, give me some face, and we can talk about this. But unexpectedly, on April 9th, China threw out a white paper from Xi, and then directly increased tariffs on the U.S. by 50%. Where does that leave Trump's face? In the end, Trump, in a fit of anger, released a big bomb, first saying that China does not respect the world market, imposing a 125% tariff on China to take effect immediately. Second, 75 countries had a good attitude, called the U.S. and did not retaliate, so their reciprocal tariffs were delayed by 90 days, only imposing a 10% tariff. Once the news broke, those who had been beaten up these days suddenly became magical again. You see, clearly lacking strength but still wanting to be tough. You thought it was the whole world versus the U.S. Now it has become China versus the whole world, right? Trump was originally targeting China. Imposing taxes on the world was just a pretext. China chose to stand firm, which precisely gave Trump a reason to decouple. China thought that by raising the flag, everyone would respond. But in the end, only China rushed to the front to bear the damage for others. In short, China lost badly. So is it really like that? First, we need to clarify one point. Those who think China lost badly, no matter what, they will believe China lost, just like no matter how much the U.S. collapses, they still think the U.S. wins. However, they do not have the authority to define who wins or loses. The real authority to define lies in everyone's hearts. So, this time, Trump's delay of China's tariffs, who really won and who lost? Let's take a look at the source of this tariff battle. Trump first imposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. Then after Canada and Mexico begged for mercy, he gave both countries a one-month reprieve, while the tariffs on China were implemented as usual. At that time, many knowledgeable people made jokes, saying Trump grabbed Canada and Mexico by the collar and then slapped China in the face. But if we say Trump's initial goal in starting the tariff war was China, then why did he later impose reciprocal tariffs? The level of Trump's team is not to be expected to be very competent, and let's not always assume they are waving a big flag. And let's not always fill in the gaps for Trump. Oddly enough, Trump's reciprocal tariffs are not that complicated. There are three reasons. Currently, the U.S. has $4.1 trillion in imports, and after adding tariffs, it could generate about $150 billion, plus the budget cuts by Musk. It could roughly fill the fiscal funding gap. It aims to rebuild the U.S. hegemonic model, shifting from profit sharing to tariff coercion. This way, without paying anything, they can still gain global hegemony, manufacturing, turning Biden's utilitarian manufacturing repatriation into coercive manufacturing repatriation to restrain the instinctive choices of capital. But the problem is making money and gaining power and developing manufacturing. This initial goal of Trump's tariffs was all destroyed by Trump's impulsive actions. You delayed tariffs on other countries for 90 days, only keeping 10% of the tariffs. So how much can you collect? 4.1 trillion in imports at 10% is only $410 billion, right? Considering market inflation and shrinking consumption, it's very likely that it won't even reach that amount. At most, it would be around $300 billion. How will you fill the deficit gap? Originally, Trump wanted to use extreme tariffs to pressure, forcing other countries to obey the U.S. But now, the whole world sees two completely different outcomes. Negotiating with the U.S. on bended knee, Trump said it was at KCMS. You could say there is not even a bit of basic respect left. And for those who are stubborn against the U.S. doesn't have any particularly good methods. Instead, the U.S. has been repeatedly countered by China, a good broken house. Trump even said he was waiting for a call from China. Such words have been spoken, letting the whole world see the best way to deal with U.S. extortion and deception. Don't forget the next step. The U.S. still has to negotiate with dozens of countries. Once the paper tiger's facade is pierced, then through the negotiation table, the trick of extreme pressure to gain benefits can no longer be played. Except for a few who are used to kneeling, there will be fewer and fewer who surrender to the U.S. Originally, the logic of manufacturing returning was, Trump added high tariffs. The tax rate exceeded the profit margin. Manufacturing had to return, but now what? Trump suddenly gave a 90-day tariff extension. Only 10% changed overnight. Only a fool would invest in the U.S. What if I just got the money? Rented land, bought factories and equipment, hired workers, and then the tariffs were canceled? Where would I go to cry? So any normally intelligent capitalist who just wants to make money will only wait and see for a while before deciding who knows what crazy thing Trump will do next. On the contrary, Trump's delay this time is equivalent to giving 70 countries a lavish gift. As long as they import goods from China and sell them to the U.S., it's a 125% profit. Products originally produced in China will all take advantage of this 90-day window to wash themselves abroad through various means, whether it's changing labels or sending semi-finished products for assembly, still using Chinese raw materials and components, produced abroad or not. Will continuously enter the U.S. through this 10% tariff channel. In a steady stream, China and the washing countries will enjoy the violent window given by Americans together. Everyone enjoys good food and drink together. Let the Americans pick up the tab. Although the U.S. will definitely be strict with inspections and tracing, but never underestimate the skills of Chinese foreign trade people to exploit loopholes and flexibility. Such a vast array of goods, the already laid-off U.S. customs cannot keep up, nor can they impose fines, even if they are stopped. Can they still export to Mexico? As long as there is profit. The drug dealers who have already started selling eggs, what psychological burden is there in changing a label? In this way, the plan for manufacturing to return is also ruined. So ever since Trump announced a 90% extension for everything except China at that moment, Trump has fallen into a loyalty dispute with China and has forgotten the main purpose of his tariff stance. Did everyone say whether Trump won or lost? To be honest, in this farce, there are three people who are the most uncomfortable. The first is the U.S. Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer. In theory, matters like tariff extensions should be discussed with the stakeholders, right? Before making a decision. After all, the stakes are high. But in fact, Jamieson Greer only found out after the announcement. At that time, Greer was at a fundraising committee in the House of Representatives, testifying about Trump's radical trade policies. He was passionately explaining to the lawmakers about it. Trump's radical tariffs are reasonable and effective. But suddenly news came that the tariffs were postponed. Where do you think Greer can put his old face? The second is White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on April 7th. This 27-year-old beautiful secretary just refuted Trump, is considering the claim of suspending tariffs for 90 days on certain countries, saying it's fake news. But just 2 days later, the news of the 90-day postponement was announced by Trump. How embarrassing is that? The third is Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, Chen Guo-king. Vietnam is the fastest country to be affected in this tariff battle. Not only did they immediately call Trump, but also sent Chen Guo-king to lead a negotiation team to the U.S., bringing Vietnam's conditions to reduce tariffs to zero for the U.S., increase imports of $20 billion in American goods, strengthen control over Chinese transshipment goods. Trump is very pleased with obedient Vietnam, promised Vietnam that as long as they fulfill their commitments by April 30th, the tariffs on Vietnam would be postponed for 90 days. Chen Guo-king happily returned home to prepare for work, but as soon as he got off the plane, he learned some devastating news. Trump postponed tariffs for all countries except China for 90 days. So wasn't Vietnam's concession in vain? To be honest, Trump is playing a game of division and disintegration here. China is also feeling a bit of a headache. Back then, the 6 countries formed an alliance for self-preservation. Why couldn't it succeed? Each of the 6 countries had its own interests and engaged in mutual deception, making it impossible to unite against the enemy. Meanwhile, the Qin state chose to form alliances, tempting other countries with familial ties, easily breaking the alliance. Now, Trump's goal is to see that the opposition is too loud, so he is easing up, taking the lead first, while using the 90 days as bait, forcing countries to form battle lines. In the end, after a round of negotiations, the U.S. will reach an exclusive unilateral tariff alliance, completely expelling China from the world trade system. Don't think this is a fantasy. This is actually a reality happening right before our eyes. Recently, Vietnam imposed additional tariffs on Chinese steel of up to 27.83%. South Korea is even harsher, directly imposing a 38% tax. What if this momentum spreads to other countries? 90 days is China's breathing period, but it is also the beginning of China's real test. Now, whether it's China or the U.S., the tariffs on each other are basically at their peak. It's meaningless at home. So the confrontation between the two sides will only spread to other areas. Therefore, during these 90 days, there will be any events we can think of or not think of happening, including but not limited to expelling U.S. trade, reducing the trade volume to zero. China praises international students being scrutinized, investigated, and deported back home. China praises listed companies being forced to delist, Chinese merchant ships banned from entering U.S. ports, or charged exorbitant service fees, taxes on profits from U.S. Treasury bonds held by China. China praises assets being frozen or even confiscated. China's normal shipping activities, facing U.S. inspections and interceptions. China's surrounding waters facing U.S. and its allies, military pressure. All of these will put great pressure on China, but China will also never sit idly by. From the lengthy article published on April 8th, a 26,000-word white paper, China has been preparing for this day for a long time. The relevant policy toolbox will definitely not only include tariffs. For example, China stops the certification of liberal arts degrees from U.S. universities, completely cutting off the U.S. water efficiency, the path of harvesting Chinese parents' hard-earned money. China stops U.S.-China fentanyl cooperation. Previously controlled finished products and prerequisites are no longer managed. You all show your skills? Sell as much as you can to the U.S. China announces U.S. wheat dwarfism to the world. Black fragment disease and U.S. poultry meat abuse in southern Xinjiang. U.S. corn ear rot and other situations. China bans the export of critical minerals to the U.S. China sells off U.S. Treasury bonds, repatriates gold back to the U.S., handles U.S. assets. China bans the import of U.S. films, prohibits payment of film IP licensing fees to the U.S. China targets U.S. software abuse in China, dominant position, initiates antitrust investigations. China suspends industry qualifications for media in China. China intercepts ships carrying arms to Taiwan. All these tactics will be used. It just depends on which side can endure longer. We are all human. The game has reached this point, which is not surprising. We can only respond to each move and see who can't take it first. But to say that we have endured for a few years is enough to prove that Americans simply cannot endure like the Chinese. So what should we do? First, a hot war. Second, negotiations. But the question is, does Trump want to go to war? Or rather, does Trump have a guaranteed way to win a war? What is Trump's ultimate goal in taking office? It is not to defeat China, but to change America. Trump's real enemy is the deep state, not China. Once a war breaks out, many things may no longer be decided by Trump. The deep state's entangled influence in the military will collude with those members of Congress, using the banner of war to take away Trump's power. Originally, Trump just wanted to use tariffs to extort the whole world, but it unexpectedly evolved into a hot war. Isn't that quite unprofitable? And even if he wins, what benefits can Trump gain? The biggest benefits will obviously be consumed by the deep state. But if he loses, then Trump will have to take the blame. Trump will become the only defeated U.S. president since World War II. Think about it now. China's response capabilities in the first and even second-tier intervention areas are hundreds of fifth-generation aircraft carriers, amphibious lines, and rare ballistic missiles, drone electromagnetic railgun early warning systems, as well as global coverage of nuclear strike capabilities and CNMD defense systems. The U.S. really does not have a guarantee of winning a war. So the risk of a hot war is extremely high, and the returns are minimal. Trump comes from a business background, and he definitely doesn't want to engage in a money-losing deal. So at this time, as long as there is a good friend, whether it's Putin or Kim Jong-un, whether it's Macron or not, to mediate a bit, Trump might just back down. After all, it's just business. It's normal to have some differences. Why take it to the point of violence? China often says to seek peace through struggle. Peace is the goal, and struggle is just a means. In the end, Chinese people still need to do business with Americans and even the whole world. Behind these export businesses are countless small entrepreneurs taking risks and rural youth working away from home who are dealing with time differences, staying up late to negotiate with foreigners. They are the sailors braving the storm, and their loved ones behind them, children and the elderly. They may be our friends, relatives, and partners, or they may be strangers, but they are all part of the Chinese people. They should not become victims of stubbornness, but rather become beneficiaries of the dividends on various platforms. I have seen countless foreign trade practitioners. Clearly, they are the ones most impacted, but they still resolutely support the country's decisions. When the nation is in crisis, they do not hesitate to put their own interests at the table of great power competition. Even if it means sacrificing themselves, they will advance and retreat with the country. Then the country has the obligation to seek the most perfect outcome for these people on a fair basis. For these people, defending the interests of the people is China's response to immense pressure, choosing to stand firm without retreat, fighting to the end without a doubt. then lowering Trump's proud head to sit at the negotiation table with China is China's stance on tariffs this time, the moment of final victory. Having the determination to fight is important, but having the confidence to win is even more important. Looking back at nearly 80 years of the Republic's history, why can the Chinese people fight against heaven and earth, reach for the moon in the ninth heaven, catch turtles in the 5 oceans, 20 years to develop 2 bombs and 1 satellite, 10 years to establish the world's factory, solve industrial upgrading in 5 years, grow into a role that can confront the United States head-on in a test of strength? To trace back to the roots, aside from the Chinese people, the tenacity ingrained in their genes, more crucially, is the victory of the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea, which brought confidence in victory to the Chinese people. After all, they even defeated the world's #1 military at that time. What else is there to fear? Facing any difficulties after death, the Chinese people firmly believe they can win. This is the driving force behind all struggles. Yes, the tariff war will inevitably bring us pain, but we have all the Chinese people to bear it together. When the laboratory in Shenzhen is still lit at 3 a.m., when the lights are still on, when the bosses of Yiwu's small commodity market spontaneously research tariffs and exemption clauses, when an old man who has never left the countryside skillfully operates a drone to spray pesticides, when foreign trade salespeople would rather deliver takeout to support their families, they also leave messages online to fight to the end. This is the true people's war. Now, no matter how difficult the conditions are, can they be as tough as during the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea? Now, no matter how great the gap between China and the U.S. is, can it be greater than during the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea? Each generation has its own Battle of Shangguanling. Since we have caught up, there's nothing more to say. Let's get to work. When we force Trump to the negotiating table, it will surely be engraved on the monument of human civilization, becoming the most brilliant medal on the road to China's rejuvenation. At that time, please allow us to sing with tears in our eyes. Let the melody of singing our motherland shatter all the arrogance of the Westerners. The 5-star red flag flutters in the wind. How loud the victory song is, singing for our beloved motherland, marching towards prosperity and strength from now on.